Hello, selectors, and welcome back to the Life Press podcast. I'm Andrew, and I'm joined with just me. It's just me today. So we did a pretty big podcast last week about the Wixoss pace theory, which we put a lot of effort into. So I hope you guys will watch it if you haven't already. It's been actually a really greatly received video. And I want to thank you all for that. I was actually a little hesitant that it was not really going to be super well received or just not really well viewed at all. Instead, it was one of our more reviewed, watched videos as well as commented on. So I'm really glad that you guys are digging into the theory that we've presented, and this has been a helpful little tool for you. Today, because we put so much effort into that last podcast, we're doing a little simpler podcast this time around, and I wanted to talk about some of the new announcements that were made, as well as the main podcast is going to be me going over the Disona cards that have that are now being played, this new Disona meta a little bit, and trying to give some tips and tricks as to what's overperforming, what's underperforming a little bit, in my opinion. Maybe that can help guide some of this early meta, because the Disona meta is very different than what we've seen before in Wixoss. A little bit of a return to form, I suppose, from the earlier set formats. But maybe that'll help you guys find a little bit of a way in this bit of a different format. The first thing to announce is that they've got these new GPs coming up. So we've got GP3, GP4 coming up. First one is GP3, which is going to be at Las Vegas on July 20th. We're definitely going to be there at the Life Burst Podcast, so we'll see you guys there if you guys are going to that. Las Vegas, it's in the same place as last time. So it's a little bit of a known commodity. If you went to GP1, you could maybe do the same one here. And then the next one is in Texas. It's going to be December 7th. I believe that this July 20th one will cover we're in set 12, and it'll also cover set 13. So it'll be like all of the Disona stuff. I don't know what December 7th is going to bring us. It's definitely going to bring us at least one more set, so set 13. But there may also be a the Blue Archive crossover for that one. So I hope that one's in there. It feels like that's enough of a support that you can break away from the Disona meta a little bit for it. It's got something interesting happening here too, which is that the first and second place of each GP, 2 players each, so 4 total, will be awarded with invitations to the final tournament in Japan, which will be in February 2025. And that will be the format of it'll be the Japanese format. So we'll have to be using Japanese cards, and believe Japanese edition decks of Japanese edition cards will be provided. I don't know if that means that, like, if we put in our deck list, if they'll give us a Japanese version of it anyways. Either way, it looks like they're going to be doing basically make Mugen, the Mugen Cup, Mugen Shoujo Cup, the World's Series. Looks like they're planning on also having other countries be able to join. So that would be kind of cool. Mugen Shoujo Cup is going to be World's Cup, I guess, for next year, which is really cool. It'll be the 10th anniversary too, so it kind of makes sense, right? Anyways, I'll be gunning for it. I'm sure everyone else will be too. So it'll be pretty crazy event. Let's go right into the Disona cards here and just start talking a little bit about the Disona. Sorry if I guys don't look exactly at you. My screen's over here, and I will be trying to read these cards a little bit too. So we're going to go over the over-unders on these cards, or what's overperforming, what's underperforming in these cards. Disona as a set in general has been really aggressive. Open 3 lanes, right? Black Tama does that well. Mel does it really well, and Hanyo does it really well. All 3 of these decks open the lanes in sort of different ways too, and deal damage in different ways, so it's really hard to stop all damage, right? That was something that we were able to do, I think, in the last set, which is a lot less successful in this set now. Back then, there was a lot of mono white that was running, right? And basically, the tools that you used to beat mono white were very similar to the tools that you would beat to other aggro. So you were able to really mitigate the damage and sort of control things. But now that Lancer, Assassin, and Bounce are all 3 different ways that are being attacked in, it's tough to block all of those lanes of damage, those potential out types of damage. So as such, I think our format is developing into a open 3 lanes format. I don't know if it's completely that kind of format yet. Every time I've said we're going into that type of format, I've been proven wrong. And there is a sort of like more defensive deck that has been able to take the reins and crawl back. But initial testing is showing defensiveness is very difficult for this format. So if you're going to try to be a defensive deck, you're going to need to sort of work around those parameters. This also has shaped a little bit of what Disonas are good and what Disonas are bad. Generally speaking, the more aggressive Disonas are just better than the more defensive Disonas. Just because their tools to open lanes are better than the defensive tools of just keeping the lanes closed. It's not like, again, like I said, it's not like they don't exist. It's just you have to apply the right tool to the right job, and that's difficult between Bounce, Assassin, and Lancer. All 3 of those are very different types of defense that you have to guard from. Multiple LRIG swings too, I guess, if you want to add Tama back into the mix or Anj back into the mix. So when we actually is a pretty good segue for the first card that we should talk about, which is Sunspot Memory. So Sunspot Memory is able to get you a Signy barrier and an LRIG barrier. It's also able to pick you up a Disona card and put it in your hand. Its worst fact is that you have to play white in order to do it, and generally speaking, most of the white Signy in this set are not great because they're not aggressive, right? Like, that's what I was saying. So that's kind of a downside, but it's actually not terrible. In fact, I would wager a guess to say that this card is actually not even that bad in a non-Disona deck. Spending 2 enter to buy yourself 2 damage, like two life cloths almost, is actually pretty good. It's very above rate. So it's not a terrible thing. It's a Dream Team piece though, so it's a significant investment. It's not like some of these other pieces that can stop damage that are kind of like side pieces that you can choose. This card has been performing, I think, as expected. Like I said, it's pretty good, but it's tempered by the fact that it's white, and white is not super. It's strange to say, not the greatest color right now in the meta, which is strange. It has been for a long time. We followed up with Unbalanced Dance, and this card has been underperforming, in my opinion. It's an offensive tool. It's pretty good. Disona are not lacking in ways to be offensive anyways, so this is sort of like adding, I don't know, a cup of water to your cup of water. You just have a lot of water now. The Enderburn is fine, but there's other Enderburns that are starting to see a lot more play, like Diva Deathbeam and oh god, what's the other one called? Go to the Top, which are both very they're very good in what they do, as well as provide other utility outside of the Enderburn. Lancer in the Dark is great. Actually, Lancer in the Dark is great. I think the worst thing going for Lancer in the Dark is not any of the text that it starts that it ends with. The S Lancer is really good. The enter charging 2 and then basically drawing 2, right, is very good, and helps you rebound your hand against decks that would stress it, rebound your enter against decks that would stress it, or just give you general utility in pretty much all the other matchups. As well as shuffling, though. The shuffling's not that great. The shuffling, right now, Mill is probably at its all-time worst. Which is not to say that, like, if you are playing oh god, what do I call it? Like a Virtuals deck that does the auto refresh, right? That's not the Mill I'm talking about. The incremental Mill that like things like Ultra Superhero gives you, it's at its worst, because generally speaking, those decks want to go to turn 6 to really be effective, and this meta is not really letting you get to turn 5, let alone turn 4, if it can help it. So the shuffling is fine. I think shuffling your deck back into your trash back into your deck is at its best when you do it in a way that is similar to how Innocent Battle control decks were doing it, where you basically use 3 guards or 4 guards, and then you shuffle all your guards back in, and then you redraw those, because you've got the draw power. We don't have the longevity for that to be something that we're seeing in Lancer in the Dark as well. So I don't know if it's been super efficient there. Uh, I still think it's incredibly efficient though. So if you're a green deck and you're looking to do green lancery things, I'd be into it. I actually think I'd be more into it than if I was in like a red deck or a black deck and I have trouble hitting top end removal, like I'm struggling with removing level 3s. The S Lancer then suddenly becomes better because you put it on your own level 3 and you just attack through with Lancer. I think if those types of decks, it actually is better. We'll get to Wall Wolf in a second, but I think Wall Wolf is an incredible tool right now for aggro. Moving right along, we've got Dissonance and Unknown Memory. Dissonance has been performing above average, I think. It's one enter to basically take the best 2 Signy from your trash and put them into the field. And that has provided a lot of utility. So Disona have a lot of toolboxing potential. Between Emergence, the spell that brings you back a card, Kaga, which brings a card back from the trash at level 3 specifically, and also this, you are able to toolbox pretty efficiently in Disona. Disona often feels to me like what an Adams deck would feel like if it didn't have any defensive Signy, but much better toolboxing and effects that it had access to. In essence, Disona is a tribal. Is tribal, right? It's so it's similar. It's gonna feel like all tribal stuff does. Dissonance ends up being whenever anyone's played it against me or I've played it, it's always at slightly above average. I'm actually, most of the time I see someone play it, I'm kind of relieved that they're playing it because there's other things that I think are stronger. In some cases, even Xenocluster, and I'm a pretty big Xenocluster hater. So I think Dissonance has been above average. It's better if you are playing a deck that's offensive. If you're playing a deck that this is just like a way to refuel your hand, I'm not into it. I think you need to be pulling out specifically cards that end the game or help you like draw cards so next turn you can also end the game. I think that's where you want to be at with this. Unknown Memory has been excellent. In every deck that I've tested Unknown Memory in, it's been great. I think my favorite version of Unknown Memory is like a blue, like what is it called? Sunrise Blues plus Unknown Memory. But there are other actual things that are pretty good too that you can pair Unknown Memory with, and it's been pretty good. I think tempo decks really love the Unknown Memory because it allows them to run things like Summer Lives Blues. And so Unknown Memory has been great. I think it's going to actually keep getting better. It really depends on having more pieces that are Dream Team pieces specifically that allow you to run a single color and get away with it. That will make it even better. And I think that's sort of, this is going to be one of the few cards that gets better outside of Disona. Yuki has been not fantastic in my play. It does a job where against decks that are unprepared to fight against Signy barriers, unprepared to go long game, it does the job fine. However, what this deck does is it stalls, but it doesn't really refill its hand. So it's sort of weak to discard. And if you make it so that it's not weak to discard, well, then you're weak to aggro. That's kind of the issue that I'm having right now with Yuki decks in general, is that they can't prep for both sides of the Wixoss spectrum. So they can become incredibly strong against one and then incredibly weak against the other. So I haven't been super, I'd say Yuki's been underperforming. Hanyo, I would say, has been overperforming if I didn't expect Hanyo to overperform. So I think Hanyo has been actually actively fantastic. It just does the job really efficiently. The biggest thing that Hanyo does well is open a single lane, put Double Crush on something, and then have basically 2 damage with the Double Crush plus an LRIG swing. So for 3 damage, it does more or less the same damage that Tama does. However, the way that it presents its damage, Tama we solved by looping guards and guard recursion. That doesn't really happen with Hanyo. And Hanyo's Disona also make defensive Signy pretty bad, so it's difficult to wall out against a Hanyo deck, which means that it might be better than Tama in this scenario because of that. I think time will tell if we can figure out how to block out damage from Hanyo, but I don't think we're quite there yet. So I think Hanyo, basically, what I've heard is basically anyone who's put a Hanyo deck together and have put just like aggressive Disona and shuffled it together have been successful. Miko Miko, sorry to say, I've been pretty disappointed with Miko Miko lately. You guys know, I have already said I want to try to make Miko Miko work. She's a witch. That's cute. I have done quite a few iterations of Miko Miko, and I've gotten Miko Miko to above average, right? Like I've gotten it to doing the job I need it to do. But if you were to say, do I feel like it's doing the job particularly well? I don't think I could say yes to that question. I could say it does the job that I'm asking it to do and nothing else. I'm expecting more from my top tier decks now to do that. And I think the biggest problem with Miko Miko is the fact that it can't draw a lot of cards. It discards the opponent's hand really well. I think if we were in a meta that went to like turn 6, it would do better. We're not in that meta. And it doesn't really add aggression. I mean, it has a way to open a lane, but it doesn't get you there. It doesn't really get you to. And yes, stripping out cards from hands is really good in order to make guards less effective. But guards less effective is better over a longer game state. I think when this card gets a piece that allows it to draw more efficiently and make the opponent discard cards earlier on in the game, yeah, I think Miko Miko is probably going to be great after that. But right now, as it stands, just set 12 on its own, I probably would start shying a little bit away from it. Covering up with Mel and actually Tama, basically same thing has to say. They've overperformed for me by a slight amount. They have been. I thought they were going to be average. They're slightly above average. They don't really do what I think Hanyo does efficiently, but they do it well enough that in a different way that they have their own benefits. Lancer is really strong right now. Basically, anytime that you're blocking against Hanyo, you're opening yourself up to Lancer. So more or less, like with these level 1 Signies that like have, for example, Shadow. Yeah, well, you can just get Lancered through, and that is not great. Also, the plus 5,000 is relevant, right? So, which means that if you're trying to put a stat monster out there that's like, 18k, you can get pumped. Some of these Signy get pumped to like 25k, right? Like it's like you're getting Lancered through one way or another through that. So Mel is kind of the yin to Hanyo's yang. Any deck that's trying to prep to not die to Hanyo probably dies to Mel and Tama. So so in that respect, these cards are great. Like they are above average for that. But they also depend a little bit on Hanyo to force the opponent to react in a different way that's advantageous for them then. Scrolling right along here, I got like a ton of different level 2s here, so we're just gonna skip these. Layla assist line is awful. It's just bad. I just wouldn't use them. I understand that they can help push your game sooner, but like if you guys have seen the pace video, the defense that you give up in order to get the aggression that Layla offers, just not worth it. Eldora has actually been really great. I expected Eldora Searcher and Eldora Burst Rush to be good. I actually didn't expect Eldora Exclamation and Onstage to be really good, and they're also fantastic. What's funny though is that both of these assist lines end up being like almost two different things exactly. You wouldn't. They're not interchangeable. Unlike a lot of other assist lines where you're like, oh, do I want to be Madoka Float? Sure. But do I want to be Madoka Dub or do I want to be Madoka Clap, right? And you can kind of interchange them a little bit depending on the situation. I don't think these Eldoras mix. You either want to do Eldora Draw 2, followed by Eldora Onstage, which allows you to, first and second life cloth you would put into the check zone, gain the ability of down target Signy the opponent controls or draw 2 cards. You play this in a deck where you don't actually give a shit about your defense. You're not defending against anything. You are happy to take the damage, and what you're looking for is a 1-stop, because that's what it does, right? It doesn't stop 2 damage. It stops 1 damage. And you're looking for card draw. If you are in on board for those in like an aggro deck, for example, this card ends up being very good for you because it basically just reads for almost no enter, no enter. It actually is no enter. You end up downing something, so you stop 1 damage and you draw 2 cards for no enter. That's a really good rate for an aggro deck. And that's why you would want to draw 2 cards. You wouldn't want to draw 1 and check your top life card. You want that in Eldora Burst Rush. Eldora Burst Rush is basically got 2 different use cases that you want to use it in. Either you're using it in an aggro deck with really good life bursts, like the Virtuals deck, right, which is where I think its home currently is, in order to just sort of like, you're looking at 50% wins and you're saying, well, if I have an Eldora Burst Rush, I'm probably 52% chance to win because it gives me a little bit more chance to luck sack my way to victory, which, to be clear, is a route to victory. So I'm not pooping on it. It's genuinely a real way to victory. The second time you'd use it is if you're trying to pretend like it's a cheap 2-stop. You can play it in decks where you're interested, because you're tight on enter, to play this and have it be a cheap 2-stop. In the fact that it will basically say, if I get lucky, it's going to stop 2 lanes that are opening when the opponent's opening all 3 on me. And it does that job. It actually does that job well. It basically says, if you get that 50-50 on that burst, and realistically it's more than 50-50, it's more like 75% chance, because you're using Eldora Searcher like literally the same turn that you're going to end up using Eldora Burst Rush on the defense turn. You get the chance to luck your way out of it. This is a relevant way to potentially get ourselves out of a Disona situation in against these more aggressive Disona decks that currently exist. And I think it would be a perfectly reasonable approach to go for it. It does depend a little bit more on luck, though. Moving right along, Aya is not something I'm interested in. Underperform. Don't worry about it. I don't think anyone's really worrying too much about that kind of thing. And then we get into our LRs. Dona is underperforming. The job of it to boost the power of your Signy so they're out of vanish range doesn't exist. Bang is a great way to get around it. Lancer is also, generally speaking, a pretty good way to get around it, especially because it doesn't buff itself. Yep, it doesn't buff itself. The other thing that's its worst thing about it is it, unlike the rest of these things, which don't require colored activation costs whatsoever, Dona does. And that means you need to be playing Disona, and you also need to be playing white. And these 2 things don't mix well together. So Dona is just not great. I think Dona is a good card. But I do not think it's good in a vacuum. Once you put it in the Disona meta, I actually don't think it's that great of a card. I think your deck is actively worse if you have a Dona in there. Connect has been fine. If you're playing Yuki, Connect is a good card. If you're not playing Yuki, I don't think I really want that effect in my Signy. It's fine, I guess, if I was trying to splash like Sunspot Memory, but it's not something I'm actively looking to put in. Yuzuki has actually been overperforming for me. I thought it was probably a pretty bad card, but turns out in a deck that is enter hungry, which Disona often are, this is a way to save on enter late game. And the vanish your opponent's, when it's vanished, get rid of your opponent's enter, doesn't come up super often, but comes up often enough that it's relevant. I don't think this card's fantastic by any stretch. I think it's above average. But I think I undervalued it when I first looked at it. Seek Love has been actually, I will say I undervalued it. I think it's pretty good. It does the thing that Hanyo wants to do. Its life burst is actually better in this short game than I was expecting. It gets you cards and it avoids damage. All of those things are pretty cool about it. Draws you cards so you can get a card, basically, is what I'm saying, to avoid damage. That happened to me earlier today. And then it enter burns your opponent. I think that's pretty fine on its own. You often don't find cards that enter burn your opponent and also have a life burst. So it's kind of valuable in that you could play it outside of Hanyo decks and still have some relevance to it, I think. But Seek Love is actually pretty good in a Hanyo deck. I play it as a 3 of. I still don't think it's a 4 of. But I put it down to a 2 of, and I think that was wrong. I think it is a 3 of. Alios, Paraluke, Disona, Giant Insect. Under? I think it's average. I think it's an average card, is what I'm getting at. There's never been a time that I wanted to play this card. There has been lots of times where, in theory, this card would be good. But it basically, the fact that it doesn't draw you a card, kind of like ZR does, ZR gives you the option to do those things, is not so great. And the negative 3,000 is fine, but there's so many ways to open up lanes in Disona anyways right now that you don't actually need the negative 3,000 to sort of get your way through things. I think this card still has legs. I still think, obviously it's got legs, but I think this card still has legs, and I still think it's a pretty good card for future stuff. Maybe as a one-of, maybe to Toolbox with. The fact that it discards a card at random is pretty cool. But the only deck that I've really wanted to play this in has been Miko Miko, and Miko Miko has Miko Miko Fan, which more or less does the same job. Not quite. So I think it's probably average. The worst thing about it is that it doesn't have a life burst, and pretty much all the good Disona also don't have a life burst. So it's tough to find slots that Paraluke goes into. And here's the other thing that is tough about Paraluke. Tamago exists. Tamago has been overperforming by quite a wide margin in my testing. Tamago refills your hand pretty efficiently. And most of the time gets rid of your dead card, so when you draw those two off of its attack trigger, it's like basically drawing 2 cards. So while it's not exactly draw 3 cards, it kind of feels like draw 3 cards. And draw 3 cards on just Tamago is really, really nice. I think this card is underutilized right now, and I think it's actually quite strong. I have put it as a 2 of or a 3 of in all my decks. It's kind of surprising to me that Bang is like selling for $20 or $30, and basically I have just as many Tamagos in all the decks as I have Bangs right now. So I think Tamago is actually quite good. Miko Miko Fan, underperforming a little bit. I was hoping it was a little bit better than it is. The freeze target LRIG life burst is not as great as you'd hope it was. The games aren't long enough for them to be that life burst to be super relevant. It doesn't save you against the short game, so I'm not thrilled with it. But in Miko Miko, specifically as a deck, it does a good job. Anytime I've played Miko Miko Fan, I have gotten my opponent down to basically no cards in hand, right? I don't think the Shadow Signy is super relevant, but I guess it has its options sometimes. I've never played it and been like, yeah, this is it, Shadow Signy, I got this. I have always made the opponent discard a card. So I don't know. As the ability to basically make your opponent discard a card twice it does its job perfectly fine. Bang is I would say overperforming if I didn't think it was this good already. Bang's great. I actually would play Bang in non-Disona decks. It's better with the Disona decks, don't get me wrong. But the ability to basically make the opponent choose something 10k or more and put it into their enter zone, right? And you can potentially loop this effect is incredibly strong. It's one of the reasons why the offensive tools are outweighing the defensive tools, in my opinion, right now. You can't Exia this, right? Exia has gone down in my estimation, which is crazy. I love Exia. But it's gone down in my estimation directly because of this. And the other way that you would survive against some of these decks is to put a stat monster out there, right? A 15k or something like Typhon. And Bang kind of gets around that. Now, there are ways to deal with this. Remember, Memoria is actually a pretty good counter to this because it makes Bang pretty inefficient. So I like Bang. I like, there are ways, there is counterplay. It's not impossible yet. But yeah, I mean, Bang's got I think the price tag associated for it because it's correct. It does a good job. I think pretty much all Disona decks are going to want to try to run 2 Bangs if they can help it. BFF, if you're playing Mel, this card's great. If you're not playing Mel, this card's not great. It's as simple as that. I would not run BFF if I was not playing Mel. In the Mel deck, it's a pretty above average thing, but mostly it gives you an extra. So it's really easy to get to like 16 green. It's really difficult to get to like, 18 green in this format. So BFF, that's its job, is to be Mel's extra green and do the job that you're not embarrassed to play it. Umir, way, way, way underperforming. I thought Umir was going to be a lot better. Turns out it is not a lot better than I expected. Basically, you can pretty easily get yourself lanes opened with Disona. I think Umir might be better if you're playing one of these slower decks. So like Yuki, I guess, would be a good place that I would play Umir because it has enough incremental value that you can make something out of it. Other than that, I haven't been thrilled with this. Even in the black decks, I'm not trying to play this. Destro is good in the Tama deck. It's fine, I guess, outside of the Tama deck too, if you need more black, but I don't see why you would need more black outside of the Tama deck. So Destro has been average. It's not above or below. Urith is, I would say, underperforming just in general. I knew it would underperform, and now it's underperforming more. There are ways that you can make this so this thing is awkward to deal with, I guess. But it's just a lot of Disona slots that I'd rather put elsewhere, especially, again, that Disona non-life burst slot is really difficult to find extra room for. And it's the fact that it's colorless is not helping. This is a format where the Disona decks are like 5 colors. So I guess they're 4 colors. So having Urith is not where I want to be at. All right, we're going to go a little bit more lightning round now that we've gotten through the SRs. Towel. It draws you some cards sometimes, but very rarely in the early game, and you very rarely want in the late game because you probably want things that give you cards in your main phase, not your attack phase. So Towel ends up being not super great. Underperform. Nova. Underperform. Sorry to say it. Basically, anytime I've seen this used, it's mostly in a Yuki deck or in a Miko deck. Either way, Nova has not performed because those decks, generally speaking, run anywhere from 3 to 5 non-Disona, non-guards, making their number anywhere from like 4 to 9 cards that aren't Disona, and that drops this chance of success down to 70%, and that's just not great. That does not do that. You can also make this vanilla, drops it back to 3,000, and then you can kill it pretty much any way that Disona will kill it. There's also ways to just Wall Wolf attack this down, as well as just other ways to just get rid of this Signy. It's just not very good. It just isn't performing. I wish it was because I love the artwork. Pale Lady. Hate it to say that it is begrudgingly overperforming. I don't ever think that you want this as a 3 of in your deck. I think this is unlike Yuki, this is a 2 of or a 1 of, probably a 1 of in your deck. In the scenarios where you could pull it out of your trash and play it, it ends up being very good. Yuka, I would say underperforming. And my main reasoning why it's underperforming is games aren't quite going long enough to justify the 2 white enter. And also, Disona white cards are not super great, so having double white cost for it is not super great either. This card doesn't have to be in Disona cards, though. It can be in these control decks. And I think Yuka would be good there, but in our current meta, I would say underperforming because you just don't have time to gather those resources and turtle around. Guillotine is probably the only white card I think that is above average. Guillotine giving the rest of the Signy on your field plus 2,000 powers gets it out of some of the level 1 kill range, so that's nice about it. And the fact that you can make it a 13k to get it out of some other ranges is pretty good. You can still get bang away. You can still do other things to trash it, get rid of it. So it hasn't actually been fantastic, but I think it's above average. But it's pulled down again by the fact that you basically don't want to be playing any of these other white cards. I kind of wish it had a life burst. It does not. Yukimi is not playable. It wasn't playable when I first looked at it. Not playable now. New Problem has underperformed for me. I hoped it would be better, but basically anytime I see a spell that lets me look at the top 5, put some cards in my hand, if it doesn't let me get cards, it's just not that great. You have to pay white. It's another detractor for this. And it does get you Disona, but more or less Emergence does what this card does, but better. So you just would rather play Emergence if you're gonna play something. And we're not playing color rules anymore, so yeah, play Emergence is the thought. Real is overperforming for me. Real has basically hashtag delay the decision helps, right, against these life burst games that you play against the opponent. If you're opening up 3 lanes, sometimes it's better to open up 2 lanes and have Real as your third option. You know, attack down 1 life burst. No, okay, attack down the other life burst. No, okay, cool. I do my Real and I'll pay for it. It's more expensive. You are paying for that more expensiveness, but the upside to that is if it gets life bursted out, you're fine with that. You know, you didn't invest anything in it, so it's perfectly fine. I like Real. I actually like it a little bit more in these slower Disona decks than the faster Disona decks. But I think it's good. A lot of these decks are trying to get to 10 red count for X anyways, and I think Real is a pretty valid way to do it. Ano has been overperforming for me. And the reason why Ano has been overperforming is, 1, got a life burst. Can't stress it enough. Disona that have a life burst that have a relevant ability are actually pretty good. 2, it's red. I'm trying to get to a certain red count, generally speaking, for these decks that I want X Echo in. And Ano does that. And 3, that plus 5,000 is actually not irrelevant. You can attack over a lot of things. If you're lancering, it's best friends with Wall Wolf. You can attack over things. You can get rid of things that you wouldn't normally be able to get to. Pumping over, you know, a negative 12k assist is pretty relevant. It's been overperforming for me. Likewise, Firecracker's been overperforming. I think we all know that Firecracker is the best card in the set, period. It just is. It's one of the main reasons you run Disona. I think you run 4 Firecracker in any Disona deck, and even if you don't have any red influence whatsoever. I think that card's fantastic. It also helps because because this meta is so fast, blowing through your hand's not that usually that big of a deal. Firecracker is kind of going through that. Lalaru has been it's been more disappointing than I care to admit. I have wanted Lalaru to be better, especially my Miko deck. But at no points in times has it been relevant. It has always and always and always just been a red card with life burst, and it does the job there if you want a red card with life burst. But I mean, maximize on Ano before you do that. There's really no difference between 3k and 5k in this meta. So in 8k, honestly, 8k is probably the best stat line that you can be at. So, but even then, Ano helps your Wall Wolf run over an 8k. So level 2s don't matter really right now. There was last format that we were in, level 2s were great, right? You can dodge over pursuit. Now, yeah, it's not really that relevant anymore. This card, I don't know how to pronounce it. Underperforming. It's been fine. It's a red card, and I think sometimes you play some extra red cards. But I don't actually think this card's been super relevant. Rickshaw, underperforming. It can open a lane that you wouldn't normally to, but your level 3 slots in your Disona are more valuable. Disona also blow through their hand pretty quickly, so adding more reasons to blow through your hand really quickly is not super great. I think if I wanted to blow through my hand pretty quickly, I'd run opening signal. Opening signal, while not a rise card, is a spell card, so you are blowing through your hand in order to play it. But it gives you that hashtag delay the decision thing again. And it advantages 10k or less, which is pretty much everything. Because there's most of the Disona are also 10ks. And whichever ones aren't, you can usually handle with like Bang or like Black Thomas Trash Effect. So there's ways around it. You know, I think opening signal, you're also probably playing some amount of red anyways, right? So between 4 Firecracker, I don't know, 2 to 4 Ano, and 3 opening signal, you've got a solid red start now, and you can play opening signal very easily. Moving into the blue Signy, Madoka has been slightly above average. In a Miko deck, you care about drawing cards in a Yuki deck, or whatever it is. They care about having cards in hand. This gives you a card in hand, right? And it's in blue, which I think is a relevant color for both of those types of things. So I think this card is fine there, but it's better in those longer game decks, and I don't think those longer game decks are getting the long game, the runway to run. Matcha Frappe has been overperforming by a wide margin. Disona don't do great in terms of refilling your hand outside of literally just time ago. Matcha Frappe doesn't fill your hand, but it takes a dead card out of your hand and gives you a relevant card usually. And thus Matcha ends up being almost like card advantage, as close as Disona gets to it, really, anyways. So I like Matcha Frappe. It's also got a life burst. That matters, I keep saying that. And the life burst gives you card advantage and also deals with the Signy on the opponent's board. Both those things are check boxes off that white-blue decks want to do, and it's so rare in this to do it. If I could run 4 Matcha in pretty much every deck that I could, I would, if I could. Pond Turtle. Pond Turtle has been underperforming. I know that's strange to say, but it is not Monument. You'd think that it's better than Monument, because in some cases it's 5k. Hint, it's really never 5k. You were blowing your hand so much to do your Firecrackers and your Pond Turtles that this is never 5k. Sometimes it is. Very rarely. So if you take away that chunk, it ends up being just a complete downside, that you can't discard certain spells, certain non-Disona Signy that you might have added to your deck to try to... The decks that want to run Pond Turtle, generally speaking, also want to add non-Disonas into their deck too, so they can kind of make up for the fact of the lack of good blue and the lack of good white cards that are available in at least set 12. So it makes Pond Turtle a little worse there. Pond Turtle is a good card. I'm not saying it's not. I'm just saying that it hasn't lived up exactly to the expectations that I've wanted it to be at. Sui, I'm not freezing anything. I'm just not. I theoretically could be freezing some more with Matcha Frappe, but I'm not freezing things. I'm not enter starving my opponent. The games aren't going long enough for that. I'm trying to discard my opponent's hands down with Miko, for example. So I am managing the resources, but not their enter resources as much as Sui would want me to do. So Sui's just been not relevant. Likewise, Hope Diamond has not been relevant. I think I would play Hope Diamond if it was 8k. And the only reason I play it is because it's a level 2 blue Signy that's 8k and has a life burst. It doesn't. It's 5k. It dies to literally everything in the format. As such, not good. If it gets targeted, it makes your opponents discard a card. Truthfully, all of the Disona decks are pretty fast and loose with their hands anyways, and any deck that you'd be wanting to play this in, you've got better ways to discard your opponent down. They probably don't have a hand anyways. This card doesn't help you with discarding the opponent down, thus it just basically has no relevance whatsoever outside of having a life burst. Extra has been overperforming for me, to the point where even some cases I'm thinking, do I want to put Random Drain or do I want to put Extra into my deck? Right, if I'm just playing a deck that's not Disona and I have Random Drains in it already. I'm getting to the point here where I'm like, Extra might be better than Random Drain. Random Drain's downing and freezing. The freezing part is not super relevant. The making the opponent discard a card is kind of relevant, I think, in certain decks, especially because like white decks like Remember or something can use that to also levy getting their hand lower outside of their literal spell card that they're using, and monomins. So the life burst that makes them discard a card isn't irrelevant in non-Disona decks. However, that being said, being able to target the LRIG and kind of negate that attack if you're the deck that's looking for extras anyways, it's pretty strong. It allows you to have the most delayed decision possible for damage, right? You can get hit on your third life burst, right, or your third life cloth and hit this and still stop the LRIG damage. As such, Extra's been overperforming for me, even though I would say Extra is not exactly what I want to be playing in this aggressive meta right now. I just don't want to be necessarily wasting my time and resources on making the opponent discard a card when the game's not going to get me long enough for that incremental value to pay off. But its life burst has been good, so actually it ends up covering for its own bases, and I've got no complaints. Senga, it can be 7k. We talked about this. That doesn't really matter, Uh, Level 1 Signy, I mean, so it matters some cases, but the fact of the matter is that it doesn't it doesn't cover all its bases. If it was like 7K Shadow Signy level 2 or less, yeah, I'd be thrilled with it, right? You have my vote. Then it stops enough things that it can get a main deck usage. The fact that it's 7K doesn't exactly put it in the best of the world. The action down, put target Disona Signy from your enter zone to your field is relevant. I actually think it's quite good. It's almost like a better II in that respect. I think I would be most interested in this in a Mel deck and less interested in this in everything else because I am more likely to use Emergence as a card in general. And I think Emergence does what this card does better while simultaneously allowing you to enter charge if you needed to. Both being used, I think, 50% of the time for Emergence. I guess I should just talk about Emergence since I'm literally right here and talking about it right now. This card's been fantastic. Tooling your enter has been fantastic, especially for a Disona deck. And it's Life Burst to enter charge 1 and add a target Signy, put it into the Signy zone. Usually something that, like a Musica right next to it, is able to deal damage to a Signy and kill it. So you end up clearing 2 lanes with one stone there. Fantastic. It's been a very, very incredibly solid card. I would be trying to put any deck that I'm probably trying to also have Bang in, probably putting 2 Emergence in at least. If I'm a green deck, I'm having probably 3 Emergence, if not 4. The card's great. The card's really kind of nuts. Moving picture, like I said just a second ago, level 1 has Shadow Signy level 3000 or less. Cool. That doesn't stop Wallwolf from just eating it, right? Well, and Wallwolf is maybe the best card in green. I mean, Bang is I think a top contender for best card in green right now. Wallwolf does a lot of work on its own. The fact that it can get pumped to 8K and also do damage is very strong. The fact that it has Lancer, so it dodges quite a bit of life bursts too, very strong. Moving picture, underperforming. Wallwolf, way overperforming. But with a caveat, you do need to make sure that you're placing Wallwolf in there smartly. Between Musica, between Firecracker, between Wallwolf, each of them have a different means of attack that complement different deck styles. So you need to look at your deck style, choose which one works best for it. Wallwolf often works best for decks that are dealing targeted damage, right? So if you see something that's non-targeted, like moving picture, you can Wallwolf it instead, right? So Wallwolf often complements red, and red often complements Wallwolf, just as an example. I also like Wallwolf, and I think it's funny that they decided to not go with Werewolf and go with Wallwolf. Ott has been underperforming. 12K is fine. Getting this pulled out from your enter to your hand isn't really doing anything because the 12K has just been fine. The enter charge 1 and then stopping an LRIG damage is fine. None of them are so utterly amazing that I'm like, ooh, we did it, man. I think if the life burst just stopped A damage, it would be better. It's just not really what I'm feeling right now. Ivy is what I'm feeling. I need to justify putting Bang into my deck. I want anywhere from 6 to 8 enter. 6 is tough to work with. 6 green is tough to work with for Bang, but doable. 8 is very, very, very doable. Ivy often helps you get there. Ivy's just a very, very good Disona card in general, too, because most Disona decks are pretty enter hungry, and Ivy solves that problem. The only downside is Ivy can't be used in Disona Light package that sometimes goes around. But okay, so what? Ivy's a great card. Mad Dogma is not been good. These decks, like I said, they're enter hungry, so they want some enter. But any deck that you're like, yeah, I really need that enter, like Mel, for example, there's other ways that you can do it, right? Hanyo can do its own thing. Discard a card to enter charge 1. And Mel has its own specific Signy that does the job, so you don't need Mad Dogma. Underperforming, totally. We talked about Emergence. Musica, overperforming, average. I would say Firecracker and Wallwolf are the better of the two, and then Music comes in as a third option. there are some decks where you want to play 4 Firecracker, 4 Wall Wolf, and 2 Musica, because you're going ham, and it does the job there. There's also decks where, ironically, sometimes you're playing quite a bit of like stuff like Emergence, which has a life burst that puts a Signy out, and in that scenario, that's one of those scenarios that you'd rather go for Firecracker, for Musica. Um, and the reason I say ironically is Emergence is a green card, so you think you'd want to use Wall Wolf in that scenario because green supports green, but whatever. I digress. Uh, this is where Musica shines, is in those types of life burst decks, often paired with Eldora Burst Rush, for example. And Musica overperforms in those types of decks, but is average on a whole, I think. Maho Maho has underperformed for me. I have wanted it to be better. Maho Maho actually has performed better in non-Disona decks than in Disona decks for me. Mill 2 is good on a level 1. I'm actually not arguing with that. I think in the future, this card probably sees play and is pretty good. But that future requires us to get to a place where I want to be actively milling my opponent, and that doesn't happen until we enter a turn 6 meta. And so for right now, Maho Maho just kind of has to sit and wait. It's a good card, but I think it needs to sit and wait. While we're talking about Maho Maho and Mill, we should just skip ahead and talk about the Bacteria Signy that I don't know how to pronounce the names. Orizil Disona. Mill 6 will sometimes get you there against certain opponents. I do think Hanyo in specifically burns through its deck quickly enough that the Mill 6 is probably relevant. So I think you can probably get a refresh off of this one. And it never really hurts putting this as a 1-of in your deck. You're probably trying to hit certain number quotas anyways. So as a toolbox card, if you've got toolboxing things, I think this card's perfectly fine to play. But it has just been strictly average. And most of the time, I have found that I haven't really needed to mill my opponents out in this type of meta. So I don't think it's super, super relevant. It's as relevant as oh god, what's that card's name? As Phalaris is. So in any deck that you don't run Phalaris, it performs, but sometimes it just misses because the games go too quick. Monkey's Paw has been underperforming. Like I said, anything that's been stat monsters has basically been underperforming. Monkey's Paw is a stat monster, and the milling your own deck is not relevant. Like you're going through so much enter and so much discard right now that your trash is getting kind of stocked with what you need naturally anyways. So milling yourself to get a critical mass in there hasn't been something I've been looking actively to do. Its life burst is fine. That's it. I think there's other ways to put black cards in your deck, Musica, and another one to put into your deck would be Kagomika. This card's great. This card, however, is what I'm saying is literally a great card. Probably top 5, I'd say, of the cards that are Disonas. It's a black card, so sometimes you don't want that because you want to fit in green or something. And it's a black card that requires black, so you need to have a pretty dedicated black package to make it work. But if your partner Signy is relevant, which it often is, Kagomika ends up being a very good choice. More importantly, it's 8K. I like that number. It is the hardest number to kill right now, I think. And also, it is Life Burst allows you to put a card into your hand or into the field Disona. That effect is strong, like I was saying. So there's basically that Life Burst. If you're playing Emergence, you're playing this, maybe something else that puts cards into play. Kagomika ends up being very good in those scenarios and pushes you towards a certain type of level 1s that open up lanes. Hunray has been underperforming. Negative 2K, it's just not worth it. It has targets now. There's a lot of 2Ks in this meta, so it's not awful, but I don't think I'd want to run it. There's other choices to run. Black Aura as a spell that is doing negative 3,000 is underperformed. I think it's worth it if you are playing a deck that also plays black and needs more black enter. So Black Aura ends up being pretty good there. The problem is, in general, spells rip your hand apart quicker, outside of like Emergence, right, which basically buys you the card back. So spells are a little bit of a tough sell in Disona specifically because your hand is getting unstocked pretty quickly. So doing half the work of unstocking your hand sooner is probably not where we want to be at. Servant's a good card. You want 4 servants probably in every deck. That was a joke. I'm just gonna keep moving on. And then we've got our tokens here. So we've gone through the entirety of the Disona meta. Disona is an aggressive meta. I think you're going to need to figure out tools to slow it down. I think those tools exist in the LRIG deck, mostly. And I think you might need a little bit of luck. And if you aren't running life bursts and you were trying to be a deck that's like going to turn 5, turn 6, you're not running some life bursts, right? You're running some life bursts that intercharge you and draw you cards. Not where you want to be at. If you're a turn 4 deck, those life bursts are great. But I do think if you're still resolute in playing 4 copies of Exia and thinking that's a defense, I gotta tell you, it's not a defense anymore. I still think Exia has its place. I think after you make your opponent waste their resources so they can't get rid of Exia in the late game, it becomes better, but that doesn't mean 4 Exia is the right move anymore. As sad as I am to say it, we are entering a meta where red and green is really good, and that's been a while since we've had that meta. I actually like the Disona meta. I think it's got an interesting problem to solve with its aggression. And let me know if you guys have figured out maybe how to solve that a little bit on your end. And if you disagree with any of my cards over and unders, let me know.